Okay, by now everyone should have 2 pages on money management, just like we did last week. Again, this is so important what we're talking about. Rather than having it on a PowerPoint that you see for 20 minutes and then you never have a copy of it again, I wanted to give handouts for this today. So you've got the same sermon notes I've got today, all right? So that you'll know when I go off script and start thinking of an analogy that just pops into my head. Actually, I have a few planned that are on here, but that's all right. So this is part 2 of managing our money. In the bigger series of life management, we're talking about all the things that need to come under the lordship of Jesus, which is everything. It's our whole life. We're just saying, you can have it all. You're worth it all. I give you my all. I surrender, right? And we're surrendering our entire lives to God, and we are trying to find a way to manage every area of our life under the lordship of Jesus. And would you say that money's a pretty important part of your life? Yeah, I mean, we use it every day, we think about it every day, we plan for it every day. There's hardly a decision that goes by that doesn't affect your money one way or the other, or money affects your decision, right? And so, obviously, this is something that we need to manage well under the lordship of Jesus. There's an old saying that says, failing to plan is planning to fail. And I think sometimes by not making a decision, by not making a plan, by not thinking ahead too far, is where we fail. And so it's important, just as in every other area of our life, that we plan to succeed in this. And every good plan is written down. The dullest pencil is better than the sharpest memory. And my memory's not that sharp anymore, so I'm glad that we have pencils and pens and computers and all kinds of good things like that to help me keep up with things I need to. If we're going to bring this under the lordship of Jesus, our money management, we first got to give it to the Lord, right? We got to say, Lord, all I have is yours, just like we sang. Ecclesiastes 5:4 says, when you make a vow to God, do not delay in fulfilling it. And the rest of that passage says, saying, because it's a bad thing. Don't go to the temple messenger saying, my vow was a mistake. God will hold you accountable for that. It's better not to make a vow than to make one and break it. Now, I'm not saying you need to make a vow about your money, but we do need to give it over to God. Okay? There have been times, short term, where I've made a vow. God, this is what I'm going to do with this portion of my money, or with the whole budget, or I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do this. And that really helps me, because I take a promise to God very seriously, as we all should. And I want to say, God, this is an area of my life I need to get better management of, and work it in a way that you would have me do that. And giving it over to God in prayer is a great way, but also giving it over to the Lord in principle. Psalm 119 verse 100 says, I have more understanding than the elders, for I obey your precepts. There's something about understanding the principles of God and understanding kind of what are the spiritual laws at work in our world. How does all of that work? And I'm going to follow those principles. I'm going to go by those precepts. I'm going to understand what the Word of God means when it says a certain thing. And I'm going to let that be my guideline for how I manage every area of my life. The Bible says a whole lot about money. There's so many principles, so many precepts, so many commands, so many examples for how we are to manage money. Now, I'm one of these guys that loves top 10 lists, okay? I just love top 10 lists. I came up with a top 10 list for top 10 signs you might be an undisciplined money manager, all right? So I'm going to go through these. I've got a passage for each one of these, about a passage in the Bible. Number 1, you have no plan or records of spending. Proverbs 23:5 says, cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone. If we don't intentionally manage it, somehow it tends to get away from us without us knowing. Dave Ramsey says, a budget is so you can tell your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. All right? That's a good plan. All right? And if you have a good plan, then you manage better. You manage better. If you don't have a good plan, you don't know if you're reaching your goal or not, because there's no goal without a plan to get there, right? Or records of spending. It's important to go through records. Hey guys, we have less and less excuse to not have records in our finances now that we're in the digital age. If you use a debit card or a credit card, you get a bank statement, you get a bill, an itemized bill. You can keep it on a spreadsheet. We have QuickBooks. We have all these things at our disposal so that we can track what we want to do with it and what we have done with it, both looking into the future, our plans to budget for it, and our records for what we have done with it to see if we actually met our goal with the plan, right? Okay, the second one is this: you can't delay gratification. Proverbs also says haste leads to poverty. Haste leads to poverty. If you're the kind of person that can't delay gratification, there is a part of your life you need to get under discipline. All right? I've seen so many of these tests that they did on the kids, and they'll say, all right, you can have this small piece of candy right now, or if you can work this puzzle out and wait for a little while, you will get 2 larger pieces of candy here. And they looked at the kids that just went for the, all right, I want the candy now, It might be gone later, I don't know. But versus the ones who were willing to work and plan for it and wait for it and be patient with it. And they tracked those kids throughout the school year. And you know what I'm about to say, right? Better grades, better social interaction, more things kind of went well for them. And it happens. We've got to be people who know how to delay gratification. Understand that life is a process. Managing money is a process. Number 3, you love indulging yourself. Proverbs has so much wisdom. A lot of these quotes are going to be from the Proverbs that we see here. Proverbs 21:17, he who loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and oil will never be rich. If you prioritize any one thing in your life that becomes your obsession, that becomes your idol, that becomes something that's more important to you than anything else, that's where your money is going to flow, and it's going to get out of hand. All right? The thing that, if you love something so much that you just don't care to look and see how it affects your plans for everything else in your life, and to be able to look and proportionally give what something deserves, then you will lose money. And you do that long enough, and you will be poor, just like Proverbs says. Is there one little pet peeve you have? Is there one little hobby that you have that tends to get out of control? Is there one little habit that you have that is starting to eat away at your budget, that over time you know it's going to ruin you? Get it under control. Don't indulge yourself. Life is not about indulging here. Okay? Next one is you long for a get-rich-quick scheme. If you've ever been on a restless night and you woke up because you couldn't sleep and you turn on the TV and there was nothing on but infomercials, you're like, because you've been awake for way too long and you're not thinking straight, but you're still tired, and you're like, I really need one of those gadgets. I really need. Oh, yeah, I need to get on that plan to get rich. I could do well in this, that, or the other thing, right? We hear a slick salesman come by and say, if you just did this, boy, you get this huge return on your investment and do this. And I don't know if you're like me, but I have tried some of those things, and I'm just like, they just didn't turn out the way I thought they would. They didn't. Next one is you're prideful about what you have. Proverbs 21:4 says, humility and the fear of the Lord bring wealth and honor and life. Wow, I thought it was a get-rich-quick scheme that did that. No, it's not. No, humility and fear of the Lord. If we humble ourselves before God and say, God, everything that I have is what you've given me, and I just want to give it back to you. Show me how you want to use it. I'll use it the way you want me to. It's going to save us a lot of bad decisions in the first place, but it's also going to keep us humble, and money will not become a pride point with us. So many of the negative emotions and even sins that are associated with money begin with pride or greed. They begin with those things. And we have to put money in its proper perspective. Money is temporary just like our lives are temporary. But true riches are forever. Right? Eternal riches are the ones that God gives. Now, can He and does He bless us with physical, material, financial prosperity at times? Yes, we're going to read a verse on that here in just a little while. If we go by His principles, and if we stay humble, and if we fear the Lord. All right, next is you lose to the temptation of greed. Proverbs 22:16 says, he who oppresses the poor to give increase to his wealth will come to poverty. Now here's the sad thing about this truth, and several of the other truths you read about in Proverbs. These things don't happen immediately. We've been in life long enough to see people who are oppressive to other people, bosses who are tyrants but still seem to get promotions, people who are power hungry, who they're just out to get rich and they do whatever it is they're doing and make it look sincere and sucker people in so that they can get money off of other people and that kind of thing. We've seen that happen. But you know what? In the long run, Bernie Madoff made off with a lot of people's money, but he ended up in jail, right? Okay? We have to not lose to the temptation of greed, all right? Your budget is disproportionate with miscellaneous items. I remember the first time I made a budget, and I was like, I don't even know what all categories, I don't know what line items to put on there. So I did this. What I did was, I recorded everything I spent for a month, and then those were my categories. And then I looked at how much I had spent under each one, and I'm like, whoa, some of these are a little disproportionate from what they should be. Why am I putting this much money into this thing that's not that important, and this much money into this thing which is more important? And I'm a visual person, so being able to see a budget on paper or on a spreadsheet on my computer really helps me go, all right, I am prioritizing. And on our personal family budget that we work with now, we start at the top. We put the highest priority at the top, all the way by category. Now we have subcategories too, and some of the subcategories don't quite evenly line up. But the point is, we put the main categories up at the top that are the most important, and the ones that are, if we had to cut somewhere, or if we just needed to, if we had a tight month or something like that, we could do that. And that helps me make decisions too, when it's like, oh, all right, we had this extra big expense here. We could either take a little out of savings, or we could cut back a little bit here, and we know exactly where we would cut back. Those miscellaneous items that have some value, but they're not really on the essential list, are the things that can get cut. So we put tithes right up at the top. We put taxes right up there underneath that, because that's what it says. And then we put, housing and food and clothes and communication and transportation and insurance and all those things just go down until we get down to the things that, if you didn't do it, it wouldn't be as good of a month, but it'll be fine. We paid all our bills, right? So look at those miscellaneous items. Look what's disproportionate in your budget after you've written it down, and see if there's any adjustments that need to be made. Next, spending feels good, but giving doesn't. How many shopaholics? You don't have to raise your hand. How many shopaholics do we have? Everybody loves to go shopping, right? I like to buy new things. Some people like, some of the husbands, no, I don't even get a chance to go shopping. My wife does it all for me, right? Okay, so, but it's an easy thing to spend money for a lot of people. And yet it's a hard thing sometimes for those people to give. And then it feels so good to give, to spend, but then when we give, it's like, it's a little harder to do, right? The giving part should be the easy, fun part, If we're trying to be like Jesus, our life is about being generous to God, to other people. The giving should feel good. The spending should be like, okay, let's use some discretion with this. How much do I really need to spend on this thing? How much do I really need to do that? And if, again, going back to this previous one, if your budget is disproportionate with miscellaneous items, then you may fall under this next category where spending feels good but giving doesn't. Next, you love to say, charge it. Proverbs 22:7, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Why is it that the couches in the bank are nicer than the couches in my house? All right? Because the borrower is servant to the lender. All right? Why is it that the people who walk into the casino and walk out of the casino don't walk out and go to a home that has all the bells and whistles and food and buffet that the casino has? Because the house always wins, right? That's right. Why is it, and we could go on and on and on, right? The borrower is servant to the lender. When you use a credit card and you don't pay it off every month, you have already signed an agreement before you get that credit card saying, if you don't pay it off at the end of the month, what you don't pay off, we're going to charge you interest for. And when you look at the percentage of interest that they charge you, you look and you say, what did God say about usury again? What? That we're not supposed to do that? We're not supposed to be involved with that? What? And here I am on the wrong end of it. I think both ends are wrong when it comes to usury. But God, there's not a command out there that never says don't get in debt, but there's a lot of wisdom in there saying that, if you buy something on debt, on credit, on something like that, and you don't have the means to pay it back, you're going to get in trouble. It's going to hurt you financially. It's going to do that. And I promise you, I've experienced that quite a few times in my life. And it's an easy thing to do, but we need to really pay attention to God's wisdom. Okay, the final one is this, 3 letters, NSF. Anybody know what that stands for? Non-sufficient funds. That sounds like the voice of experience talking there. I don't know. Proverbs 21:20 says, a foolish man devours all he has. If you spend everything you get, how much do you have at the end of the month? Nothing, because you've spent everything, right? You're like, Barry, why all the negativity? Your top 10 signs of an undisciplined money manager. I mean, why look at the negative side? Oh, but wait, there's more. Look on the back of your page. Here's top 10 signs that you might be a disciplined money manager. All right? So we look at the positive, the flip side of this. Next, you have committed your plan with a major emotional anchor. I remember the first time I realized, I'd gone to a retreat, and it wasn't about money, but one of the speakers was one who was a very good teacher on this. And I was in either college or just right out of college, and I was in some credit card debt. And the speaker said something about, a lot of people who are in debt don't even know how much debt they have. They don't know how much interest they're paying every month, and they don't know what percent interest they're paying every month. And I was like, that's me. So you know what I did? I went home after that retreat, and I was shocked. I was shocked that my credit card company was charging me 21% interest. I'm like, oh, this is wrong. Something is very wrong here. And something's got to change about this, all right? And it became an emotional anchor with me. For the first time in my life, I was shocked at debt. And after that, I learned to not like debt. And then later in my life, I learned to hate debt. And now I'm at a point in my life where I despise debt, okay? Because the mistakes I had made at earlier times in my life are things that I'm still paying for. Literally, okay? And I don't like that. Because I made the mistake. I made the decision. I did that. I got myself in trouble. I'm paying for it, and I hate that. So I have an emotional anchor now that is helping me. Next, you are well educated on spending, saving, and investing. And I think this is probably where I got off to a bad start. I love my parents. My dad was an accountant. I mean, he was a master when it came to managing money. It was great. But neither one of them were really trainers. Okay? They loved me. I know they loved me, all this kind of stuff. None of them. I remember 2 times my dad taught me, he trained me how to tithe. And I've been a tither since I was 6 years old. When I first got my very first allowance from my parents, I've always given at least 10% to the church and try to do some benevolence and try to do some mission work on top of that if I'm able. All right, that's just been my personal standard for my whole life. When Noah and I got engaged, we talked about this. She was already a tither. We agreed that for our entire life together, for our entire lives, our marriage, this was going to be a priority in our marriage. Okay? So I got educated on that, and I did really well at it. I didn't get real educated on some other things. And guess what? I didn't do really well about it. So if you're a parent, you have a young child, let me encourage you, train them on more than one aspect of money management. Tithing is great. Found out in college, balancing your checkbook is great too. Because there's extra fees that go along with... my parents literally, for a gift, it wasn't my birthday, it wasn't for Christmas or anything. One time I came home from college and they had this sign for me that says, I can't be out of money, I still have checks. And I put that on the side of my dresser as a reminder that, oh yeah, I need to balance my checkbook every now and then, right? Okay? Next, you sow in the early part of your life so you can harvest at the end. And we need to talk a little bit about the power of compounding interest. So I'm going to ask you to hold right there and look on the very back of your second page. It's got the little chart with all the numbers on it that kind of blur together. Um, here's the power of compounding interest. If you started when you were 25 and you went all the way to 65, which is a kind of a common retirement age for a lot of Americans, you would have 40 years of savings that you would invest into something that could grow interest and compound. And by compounding, I mean, the first year you put your principal in, it's just what you put into the account, and it gains some kind of return on investment. We'll call it interest, although depending on what you're investing in, it might be called something else. It might be called a dividend, or it might be called something else, but we'll just use the word interest for our purposes today. And then the second year, you put the same amount in, but you still have the principal and the interest that was earned, which is now kind of all your principal if you look at it that way, and you gain interest on that. And then the third year, you have the principal from the first 2 years and the interest from the first 2 years, and now you're gaining interest on all that. And as long as you don't touch it, it's in like a retirement type account where you kind of put it in a position where you're really not allowed to touch it unless there's some hefty fees and fines and that kind of thing. Then over about 40 years, $100 a month becomes $920,000 plus. $200 a month becomes $1.8 million. $300 a month becomes $2.7 million. $400 a month becomes $3.6 million. $500 a month becomes $4.6 million. You're a multi-millionaire by the time you retire. Wow! I wish somebody would have trained me on this when I was 25 or 20 or 15. So parents, train. And those of us who are behind the curve because we didn't get trained, start now. Start now, because even if you can't get to 4.6 million, you can improve your situation wherever you are. Whether you have a few years or many years, if you'll work God's plans, it will help. So begin sowing in the early part of your life when it comes to investments. And staying out of debt will help you have the money freed up to invest, all right? And you can harvest at the end. Proverbs 20 verse 4 says, "The sluggard does not plow in season, so at harvest time he looks but finds nothing." Our goal should be, one of our goals in finances should be, that by the time my health is no longer able to work a regular job, I will have saved and invested enough that I can live off the principal, live off the interest, and not have to touch the principal. That is a great goal for you to have, because it's in line with the principle that God says, as far as it depends on you, don't be dependent on anyone else. Now you don't have to worry about, is Social Security still going to be there when I'm 65 or 70 and a half, or whenever you have to take it out, right? You don't have to depend on family members to help you out when you're old. You don't have to depend on anybody else for anything else, because you have sowed in the early part of your life and now you can reap in the end of your life. It's a spiritual principle. It's also a financial principle, okay? Next, you live on less than your income after tithes and taxes. Can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people. They're like, preacher, pastor, I want to give to the church, but after I pay all my bills and take care of all my things, I don't have any money left. I'm like, okay, well, you don't understand what a tithe then is. Tithe means 10%. It means a tenth. But according to the biblical description of it, it is the first 10% in our budget. That's why it's top on my line item on my family budget. All right? It's the first thing. So I've never had to say, wow, this month I don't have enough to tithe on, because the first 10% always goes to God. Always. And I don't have to worry. Now, there's times I'm like, I got to the end of the month and I didn't have time, I didn't have money to do this, but I've never had to say I don't have anything to give to God, because He gets the first 10%. So, if we give our first 10% to God, and then our next, whatever tax bracket you're in, to taxes, that percent, and then you prioritize essentials first, food, clothing, shelter, and we might add communication and transportation in our day and age to that essential list. And then you look at the other things and prioritize them according to your values that are spirit-led and biblically based. You will be on a good budget, all right? Next, you show, and the principle here is, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. That's a quote from Jesus. That's why he's saying you got to pay your taxes and you need to give to God. Next, you show integrity in your financial dealings. Proverbs 13:6 says, righteousness guards the man of integrity, but wickedness overthrows the sinner. I see so many times, people who are Christians and so many of their lives, so many parts of their lives are under the lordship of Jesus, but then I see them taking and giving money under the table so they don't have to pay taxes on it. And I see them owing people and they never try to pay them back. They don't do that. One time I was in my early 20s and someone came up to me who was having some financial problems. And they were like, hey, I'm trying to get a car so I can get a job. Would you co-sign for me on this loan? And I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. And their response was, oh, I thought you were a good Christian. And that was their way of thinking. And my mind immediately went to this verse in Proverbs 22. It says, do not be a man who strikes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. All right? So don't co-sign for anything unless you want to buy it. Because you probably will. Now think about it this way. If the bank would not give that person a loan who wanted me to co-sign for them, and it's their business to know who's able to pay back and who's not, and the bank has turned them down for a loan, and even the bank doesn't get it right 100% of the time, they still have to write some things off because life happens to people even with good credit, right? But if it's their business to know, and they're not going to make a profit, and they're not going to be able to stay in existence, if they don't make a really good educated guess on who can pay them back, and they don't get it right all the time, and that bank has turned them down for a loan, why do I think that they're going to be able to pay me back? All right? So, exceptions to this rule, kids get in their first car and they don't have established credit. You have already seen with them that they are good at this kind of thing and they can do this. They just haven't gotten very established. As a parent, you might want to do that. But as a general principle, the Bible is clear. You strike hands in pledge with someone else, you put up security for someone else, you become a guarantor, you become a co-signer, that kind of thing, you're going to lose. The overwhelming majority of the time, you are on the losing end. You're on the hook for what somebody else can't pay. So they get the car, you get the debt. Okay? You get the payment. Next, you agree with your spouse on your spending plan before setting it into motion. Now, Matthew 18:19 says a very interesting thing. If two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. We've got to make sure we're getting this one in context. He's not specifically talking about budgets here, but he is talking about a general principle in life. And in marriages, if you're married, okay, it is important that you, and in the marriages, usually there's one that's better at money management and tracking and budgeting and one that's not as good. And it's real easy for the one who's really good at that to say, I'll just do it all. Okay? And I mentioned to you, I think it was last week, one of my favorite call-in shows, 20, 30 years ago, was Larry Burkett. He would do a live call-in show on money management. And so many times you'd hear this call come in from a widow who was recently widowed, and she would say, you know what, my husband died 6 months ago, and I am now in trouble, and I'm bouncing checks, and I'm not making bills on time, and I'm doing this and that and the other thing. And my husband just always took care of that. He just always did it for me. And now I'm kind of lost. And Larry Burkett would always say the same thing to these people. He'd say, radio audience, listen to this. Even if you are the one that's better at it and you do the majority of it, or maybe you even do all of it, the other spouse needs to know what's going on. You need to review the budget at the end of every month. You need to look at it. You need to look at where it went, look at where some mistakes might have been made, communicate about it. Because listen, there's no kind of stress in a marriage like money stress. Amen? I mean, even the fights that aren't about money, if the money stress is there, it's the undercurrent to all the other fights, right? I'm speaking from experience here, okay? I've made mistakes, all right? It's there. It's there, and it's that unspoken tension that is the undercurrent to every other conflict and every other thing going on in the marriage that's not right. You want to improve your marriage? Communicate money matters with your spouse. Even if you're the one that does 99 or even 100% of it, Make sure you're communicating. And then if you were to pass away, at least make sure your spouse is equipped enough that they know how to do it. That they know how to do it. Okay, so agree with your spouse on your spending plan before setting it into motion, and communicate at least monthly about where we are on bills and investments and saving and debt and whatever's going on in your household. Okay. Now, the next one is part 2 of that one. You stick to your agreement with your spouse, all right? It's one thing to say, okay, we talked about it. It's another thing when it actually comes to, all right, I'm still using the debit card all the time, and I'm not thinking about, oh, how much did we have in this area of our budget, this line item of our budget, and we just boop, 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 spend, go, that kind of thing. And in almost every marriage, almost, not all of them, but I would say the majority of marriages, this is an issue. This is an issue. Money management together. God made you one in the flesh. God made you one in your spirit. We ought to be one in our finances too. And when we're not, there's stress. When we don't communicate it, there's stress. There's arguments. There's fights. It happens to everybody. I don't know of any married couple that hasn't had some kind of disagreement or some kind of problem or some kind of lack of communication in their marriage about money. It's one that can be cleared up, okay? Next, you're able to help the poor after you have given to the church, all right? So there's a lot of priorities, and we're gonna look at what it means to be a generous person next week, along with, if we have time, a lifelong plan for managing this area of our lives under the lordship of Jesus. But we should never shut our ears to the cry of the poor. Proverbs 21 says, if a man shuts his ears to the cry of the poor, he too will cry out and not be answered. Our hearts too easily grow cold. We get comfortable with all the people around us that we just don't want to think about. We don't want to have to deal with. We don't want to realize how much people are struggling in this world and how hurtful it is to them and how insecure they are. And yet, so many of us are blessed in so many ways that we could do something. We could be the difference maker in there. But let God soften your heart. Let God do something that's going to pull on your heartstring, that's going to cause you to want to help those less fortunate than you. And next two, final two here, you have something to fall back on if you lost your job. In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil. So we plan to have a little extra. We plan that if really bad snowstorm comes and we're snowed in for 3 days, okay, we got milk, we got bread, we got water, we got canned goods, we're okay. We got it covered. It's all right. And on a bigger note, if we were to lose our job, if we were to have an extended hospital stay, if there were a family crisis, if we needed to help someone out that was close to us, we've got a little extra to be able to do that. All right? It's just wisdom. It's just good wisdom. In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil. Next, you have a saving investing plan included in your monthly budget. Of all those line items, tithing, taxes, food, clothing, shelter, blah, 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 saving should be one of your line items. And investing should be one of your line items. And I'm going to make a distinction between saving and investing. Saving is something short term, I would say 2 years or under, that you know is going to be a bigger expense, like an appliance or a car or something like that, that you know you're going to need to pay for, and it would be better to save up ahead of time and be able to pay cash for it than get a loan for it. All right? So this helps keep us out of debt, right? That's a short-term thing. We're saving up for, there's two categories for that. One is your emergency fund. We'll talk more about that next week. And that's for unexpected emergencies that are bigger ticket things. And then the other one is for specific things that we're saving up for. The next car, the next appliance, when your air conditioner or your furnace goes out in your house, or have a hailstorm and you gotta pay the deductible on your insurance for the roof damage or car damage or whatever. Okay, so you have a savings plan included in your monthly budget. All right, so back to my time management thing. We're not going to get to the second page, first sheet. So we will pick up there last week. And to save paper, since we're going to be talking about saving more next week, if you will bring this piece of Save It and bring it back with you next week. I will have fresh copies of these if we need them, but I won't make as many people as we have, because I'm going to trust you to bring this back. But we're going to talk about life after death, and we're going to talk about the mindset of being a saver. And then, if we have time, we'll go into those other two things that I was talking about earlier. A lifelong plan for how to manage money under the lordship of Jesus. Amen? All right, let's have our worship team come on up. We're going to sing our final song. And I hope you guys will have a fantastic week this week. And we're going to close out by standing up and